Sakamoto-san, it is time to make our new game, Super Metroid Prime 5, Dread, Subsistence. Did you bring the classic ingredients we need for the base of it?
Of course I did, here you go. 1 cup of losing your power-ups at the beginning of the game.
Oh yes, you can't have a Metroid game without it.
Half a cup of self-destruct sequences.
Gotta keep our players on their toes.
1 tablespoon of cryptic alien bird lore.
We definitely need that.
And lastly, different endings that show Samus without her armor, and a teaser it will take us years to continue.
Can't have a game without it. Wait, Sakamoto-san, aren't you missing another key ingredient? Our beloved purple, fire and plasma breathing, space pterodactyl pyra dragon?
Oh, about that. I gave all we had left to Sakurai-san for his game. He apparently needed a lot to properly fit him into his party fighting game.
Oh, but don't you think we really need it?
You clearly didn't use it for 3 games, so we should be fine.
Oh. True. Well, I guess he'll add these emergency ingredient instead just to be safe. A pinch of a love interest to our protagonist, and a teaspoon of a lovable retro mini-boss to boot.
You guys probably know by now that I have a bit of an unhealthy obsession with Final Fantasy XIV. It's probably become my favorite game to just relax and de-stress by completing different quests, leveling up new jobs, or just getting that new mount or piece of armor to finish a glamour set. So when the Endwalker expansion was announced, I was immediately excited. Not only because we were going to the freaking moon, but to see how this story that has been in the works for almost 10 years will finally come to a close. But looking at the trailer, there was one thing that kinda bummed me out amidst the awesome settings and visuals. And it was this guy, Zenos Galvis, one of the main antagonists making a return because Chocobo magic. To quickly explain my feelings of distaste about this decision is that every expansion so far has had 2 or 3 main enemies that you have to overcome. And Zenos already had his chance in the spotlight back in Stormblood, where he was even featured in the game's cover art. And to me, he is one of the weaker villains in the series as a whole, especially after those that Shadowbringers gave us. I know his return is owed in some part to the character's popularity, hence why he was also added into the Cydia NT, Final Fantasy's own fighting game, and that Yoshi P probably has something bigger planned for him in the story. But to me, I feel like he already served his purpose back in the previous expansion. He kinda peaked if I'm being honest, so I was wondering, is he really needed back for Endwalker? If anything, this reminded me back to the time I had the luxury of being a guest on the Shinesparkers Podcast, where one of their members, Amanda, asked me,
well, speaking of villains,
Yeah.
What do you think about the concept of bringing Ridley back and how that could be achieved?
Bird magic.
And you know what? Since then, I have been wondering about this thought in the back of my mind. Does the Metroid series really need Ridley to make a return as a boss or plot element in a future game? Metroid, like any other popular franchise out there, have heavily relied on reusing certain elements to help create a specific identity to their series that helps players know what type of game they're getting themselves into, while also providing with some groundwork for developers to come up and introduce new ideas and mechanics to switch things up between installments. And while there is nothing wrong with keeping these old traditions alive, if you may, one can't deny that sometimes these ideas kinda run their course and overstay their welcome. And when they do, they can really make a series start to feel stale, and also make players question whether or not the developers are putting any more effort into their work. So going back to Metroid, do I think this mindset also applies to the concept of Ridley constantly returning as a boss in the series? No, I don't really think so. And the reason for this is very simple. When you think about it, Ridley has rarely ever been the main threat of a game in the series. Out of so far the 13 Metroid games, counting spin-offs and remakes, Ridley has only made an appearance in 9 of them, not showing up in the original Metroid 2 for the Game Boy, as well as Metroid Prime Hunters, Echoes, and Federation Force. And out of those 9 other games, you could argue that he's only the main threat in 2 of them. I mean this in the sense that a difference from, say, most Zelda games, where Ganondorf is your main challenge to overcome, and once you defeat him the story comes to a close. In the Metroid games, defeating Ridley is treated as taking down just another boss, and he almost never is the main target you have to take down story-wise. In the original Metroid and its remake Zero Mission, your main objective was to infiltrate planet Zevis, wipe out the Metroids and defeat Mother Brain. Not Ridley, who even though was a major obstacle in your path, defeating him wouldn't end your mission but simply open the entrance to Turian. Metroid Other M tasked you with answering the distress signal of a nearby Federation station known as the Bottle Ship, in which you encounter a reincarnated Ridley that happens to be a clone thanks to some DNA traces on Samus's armor. However, even though taking down the pirate is a top priority at some point in the story, he ultimately dies off screen and your main objective becomes to stop MB, a humanoid android version of Mother Brain, who even tells you that Ridley's return was more of an accident. Metroid Fusion has you dealing with the X-parasites that have infested the BSL station, where you fight an X-Core that stole the pirate's DNA from the remains sent over from Other M's bottle ship, and uses it to become the boss known as Neo Ridley. But once again, the threat here lies more with the parasites escaping this station and spreading themselves across the universe, rather than Ridley purposely causing destruction. Metroid Prime 3 has you fighting the space pirate twice, once on Norian and then later inside the Leviathan Seed in the pirate homeworld. And even though you do help the Galactic Federation lead a full-scale invasion on the planet, your main target in the end is to stop the face-on corruption that's being led by Dark Samus, who happens to be controlling the minds of the pirates at the time. And the same thought process even applies to Samus Returns, where although Ridley makes an appearance as a secret final boss fight in the end, he shows up a bit too late after you completed your main objective, which was exterminating all the Metroids on SR3D8, and he is here more to try and steal the baby Metroid instead. Which, in hindsight, makes Samus's decision of leaving the baby Metroid on the Federation Research Station in Super Metroid seem rather odd, if I'm being honest. That leaves us with the two games where I think you could argue Ridley is actually the main antagonist or threat to overcome. Metroid Prime has Samus answering the distress signal from a derelict vessel that turns out to be a space pirate station that was not only transporting Metroids alongside a strange substance called Phazon, but also a rebuilt Meta Ridley that escapes to the nearby planet Talon 4. And Samus, rightfully so, gives chase to stop the pirate or at least find out what they're up to, before she loses track of him and decides to conduct a ground search instead. It's clear early on that finding Ridley is somewhat of a big deal, and the game does a good job of reminding you about this with the small moment you see him fly over the Phendrana drifts. However, halfway through the game or so, you could argue that Samus, and the game in some fashion, shift their attention instead to putting a stop to the face-on spread on the planet, partially because the pirates are trying to use it for their advantage. So she goes from hunting down Ridley to finding the Chozo artifacts to enter the impact crater and destroy the source of the substance. The reason to why Ridley shows up once you collect all the artifacts in the temple is probably to try and stop you from destroying the Leviathan Seed and its Phazon production. But the one game where I personally think Ridley is the actual main focus of the story is in the popular Super Metroid, where in its iconic opening the space pirate manages to steal the baby Metroid from the space colony Ceres and Samus chases him back to planet Zevis. It's thanks to this opening that it's made clear that your main mission is to stop the pirates from possibly cloning the Metroid and reuse them as a threat to hold the galaxy hostage. While you technically also have to take down the other main bosses of the game, Kraid, Fentoon, and Drygon in order to enter the second Turian area, Ridley is giving a little bit more significance by being the last boss you have to defeat, the one with higher security in his lair, but also by the fact that in the room next to his personal chamber is where you find the broken container that once held the baby Metroid. While yes, the final boss of this game technically is the rebuilt Mother Brain, you can argue that her return was more of a surprise for the player, and even then, it was most likely a decision made by Ridley to rebuild her in the first place, and possibly also grant to her with the supplies to build her new metal body. So with this in mind, let's go back to what I said earlier. The reason why Ridley doesn't become a tiresome of a tradition is because he has always been more of a large obstacle on your path rather than your main objective. and we can tell that he isn't a fully necessary element to have a great Metroid game in the process, although his presence does add a unique aspect to them. With this simple concept, the developers can use Ridley's inclusion to add an extra layer of surprise and keep players on their toes, by not being 100% sure of where or when he will show up, perhaps helping them understand how menacing he really is inside the game's universe. And if you were to ask me if they ever made a Metroid movie, series, or another game with voice acting, I would personally opt out from giving the Space Pirate a voice for a few reasons. Not so much because of how he should sound or behave, but mostly because I think that one of the main appeals of the Metroid series is its ability to convey a story by relying mostly on visual cues and animation. After all, less is indeed more, and since this is a visual medium, the more they use this tool to their advantage, the better in the long run. And let's also remember that this was one of the many key things most fans disliked about the storytelling of Metroid Other M. So instead of having the pirate talk, I will have him instead convey his thoughts or commands via a secondary character or two. That way we can keep him in the shadows for as much as possible and help build to his sinister presence, relying only on some visuals to help explain his thoughts or feelings. And I think this could also work well to sell his menacing aura in combat. We all know that Ridley's a very clever creature, but the fact he doesn't talk or directly convey his motives not only gives an extra layer to how much he enjoys violence, but could also be a deliberate intimidation tactic to make his enemies think he's just a mindless creature, thus giving them a false sense of security, only to flip the switch and show his true colors, making everyone realize that he won't waste time trying to reason with you. In the end, I feel that Ridley doesn't necessarily keep reappearing to drive a plot, but he's more the means to an end to bring some extra danger and firepower with his army into the story. It truly speaks volumes of how evil he is, that his main objective isn't necessarily to conquer the universe, but to simply spread chaos throughout it by any means necessary. But more to this, Ridley plays a bigger role in the Metroid universe, and that is to be a grim reminder to our hero about her traumatic past and the objectives that she's fighting for. However, it doesn't matter how many times she manages to defeat her nemesis, it seems like Ridley will always keep coming back to hunt her, casting a shadow on her journey in the process. And by not making it clear whether or not the pirate will appear in a game or not, helps players understand and realize how truly unpredictable and sinister of a villain the pirate really is.
Just in time.